Welcome, everyone. Let's get started. Thank you for being here. My name is Eric Jensen. Our topic is on poverty. Just so I know who's here, how many of you are in the field of education? Raise your hand, please. Thank you. And how many of you are in the category called other? Raise your hand. Okay. Good to know. So our session's going to go by pretty quick this morning. At the middle or the end, I'll show you how to get the presentation so you can download it, so then you don't need to panic about taking notes as we go through it. But let's get started, just get our brain ready to go. So just for a moment, please stand up. Once you're up, please slide that chair in. That'll give us about 10% more space in our room. And once you've got that chair slid in, at the sound of the word go, would you please touch any 3 tables in the room except your table? When you get to that 3rd table, wait for directions. Ready, get set, go. Music on, please. Beautiful. So if you would please find yourself a temporary partner. It's not a lifelong commitment. Just say you're it. So if you're in a group of 2, find a third. If you're in a, there you go. Looks like everybody's got a partner. One of the things we know about working with students from poverty is developing and regulating hope and optimism. Self-regulation skills are absolutely crucial. So we'll start off with something very simple but very powerful. With your partner, you have 45 seconds to answer the following 2 questions to your partner. First one, what am I grateful for in my life? And second, what am I most looking forward to? 45 seconds for both of you. Ready, get set, go. All right, pause for a moment, please. Most middle class and upper class people are pretty good at doing these. Many, but not all, of those who come from poverty will pause for a moment and have to think for a while about what am I grateful for? What am I looking forward to? The fact of the matter is that these are more related to life skills than they are necessarily to your socioeconomic status. So if you grow up in families where optimism is shared, parents saying to kids, when you go to college or whatever, then pretty soon that starts being in your head. I'll go to college someday. That's what my dad was like. He never even had a discussion with me. He just said, well, when you go to college, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, finish high school, go to college. Like, those are powerful messages, but these are teachable life skills. So I introduced this at the beginning because not only important life skills, but they also help us shift emotional states to states of not just capacity, but optimism. Before you head back to your seats, please turn to your partners and say, stay positive. So the big question, what's our plan in the short amount of time we have today? The plan for us is going to be pretty simple. We're going to share a few ways to close the gaps. Some might surprise you, some might be things you already knew. But the bottom line is that each of those has a part to play in the process. I've worked with about 145 Title I schools around the country, and I did doctoral work in high-performing schools that are low-performing, high-poverty schools that are low-performing, and high-poverty schools that are the reverse. So what's different between those two? And I'll share some of those answers with you. Our first one has to do with learning to be able to see macro issues, which we'll get to in just a moment. But the good news is that leadership matters. Leadership matters in many ways because leadership can make a difference in student outcomes. While teachers can make a greater influence in a classroom, leadership can make a bigger difference school-wide. So we like that kind of an effect. At the end of our brief session, I'll ask you for your own ABC ideas, something you agree with, buy into, and that you're looking forward to. So it's not designed to be an in-depth session, as you know, given the time frame that we have. So you're going to get a little bit of the abbreviation of the table of contents, of the cliff notes, of just the headlines of the topic sentences. So we're hoping that you can roll with that. For those that are interested in getting the downloads that go with this, the actual PowerPoints, you can find those online. And our website's jensenlearning.com/ASU 2016. So you should be up and running. Let's jump into our very first one. Leaders in this field have to be able to see the big picture. Why? That's part of what fuels the mission. If you don't see the big picture, then you're missing out. So in the big picture, the economy is a lot worse than most people will tell you on the evening news. For many reasons, but when you start looking at core indicators, student loans, food stamps, federal debt, money printing, health insurance, labor force participation, and on, it's not a pretty picture. In fact, just going for the cut to the chase data, we just completed a 10-year period that for the first time in U.S. history since the so-called Great Depression, we did not have a single year with 3% growth. That tells you something about the economy, that it's pretty unstable at the moment. If you look at who makes what in the United States, 51% of the population of the United States earn less than $30,000 a year. Turn to your neighbor and say, that's not good. So we see all kinds of indicators, and most of them are not very good. For example, in 29 states, let's see, we can put this up, people tell you about low unemployment. In 29 states, the number one job is truck driving. And that includes not just the long-haul trucks, but also the FedEx trucks, the delivery trucks. 29 states, that's the number one job. By the way, 25 years ago, it was teaching, working in offices. A lot of jobs have been replaced. And you ask about the big boys, the three largest banks in the United States, share prices dropped between 60 and 90% since the last peak, if you want to call it, of the recession. And so that's not a good sign either, and they're still at lows. So in the big picture, the economic structure is still hanging by a thread. Now let's drill right down to poverty. So where did all the compliance get us? Where did all the reform get us? So when we look hard at that, we say, well, it's actually not so good. In the United States, 51% of all students on free and reduced lunch, 51% of the students in public schools are on free and reduced lunch. Look at the red states on the map. That's not Republican. Those are states that are over 50%. Why is this relevant? Even the 5 largest states, California, Texas, Florida, New York, Illinois, 5 largest states, every one of them has 48% or more of the students on free and reduced lunch. That is nothing you would have imagined in your worst nightmare 10 or 15 years ago. So what we see in our country now is the current cohort of half of all school kids, school-age kids in public schools, half of them are the next generation, and they're poor. That's not a good sign. I don't like that. So it's one of many reasons I like leaders to feel very, very vested. And being vested means you should know that in the big picture, a lot of things are hanging by a thread. So poverty is impacting our country in many, many ways. So the first thing that I want to introduce to you was understanding those macro issues. Question to answer to your partner nearest you is this. Are you buying what I'm selling? Or do you think I'm like so completely overstating it and it's really not a big deal at all? Go ahead and tell your neighbor, are you buying what I'm selling or not? Question, how many are buying this? Raise your hand if you are. Thank you very much. Let's jump to the second one, understanding the real issues in poverty. So first of all, I don't decide if someone's poor by the dollars in the family. First of all, the federal standards are idiotic, but everybody knows that. If you live in urban San Francisco and you're poor, that's very different than if you live in rural Mississippi and you're poor. It's different if your family owns a farm and you're poor or not. So the numbers make less sense. To me, what's interesting is understanding what are risk factors. So poverty, first of all, it's not a culture. I don't care what anybody says. There isn't a secret club of poor people that meet and go over plans for the next week. It isn't a culture. If you tell me somebody's poor, I still don't know much about them. It is a chronic condition, meaning people are more likely to stay there than they are to move going up or down. It affects mind, body, and soul or spirit. And the bottom line is it's resulting from multiple adverse what? Risk factors. If you have a risk factor in your life and you're middle class or upper class, chances are pretty good you roll with it. But you start piling them up, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 risk factors, pretty soon you're looking around and saying, this is not good. And that's what goes on for most that are poor. So where did this gap issue come from? Most of you understand this. It's pretty straightforward. On the y-axis on the left, what you see is developmentally, where are students? And on the chronological age, how old are they? The gap is, why aren't students starting off school where we'd like them to be? So it's just a little bit of background, but it's important to understand the background because we want to make sure that you understand what is it we're trying to fix. For most, what we're going after is going after those problems that develop in the first few years. We see right near the top of the list acute and chronic stressors. It plays out in many ways in the classroom, and most teachers have no idea what they're seeing. They think kids are a bad seed or disobedient or evil or whatever, or sent in by an alien force to destroy their lives, when in fact many kids are showing classic symptoms of either chronic stress, which manifests as learned helplessness, apathy, or it manifests in anger and I get in your face. Classic symptoms described in the scientific literature for 30 years. Obviously, huge language gaps. There's cognitive gaps, and of course, social emotional support is different when you grow up in a home where you don't have both parents at home. 74% of middle-class families have both parents at home. For those that are poor, it's the reverse. 71% have only one parent at home. Next one, the community support and the parenting support is very, very different depending on whether you're poor or you're not. Simple example when it comes to stressors. Among low-income kids, stress levels are 17% higher. Turn to your neighbor and say, that's not good. Why is that not good? Because your body's always got cortisol in it, and that's the indicator used in this study. It's always got cortisol in it, but when your cortisol levels are high, that starts working against you. 2 places in the brain where you have a lot of receptors for cortisol, prefrontal cortex and hippocampus. And most of you know the hippocampus is not a school for hippopotamuses. It's a pretty important spot for learning. So the symptoms that we see that show up when there's chronic stress, we see students who are inattentive, they're impulsive, they don't predict well, they have worse working memory. Teachers who don't know better will say things like, the kids are dumb, slow, and stupid, or these kids can't perform, or these aren't college material, all of which are lies. Everything up on the screen can be taught and is taught in schools that perform well. These are symptoms of stress disorders, which is one of the reasons why I'd written books about this, just because I wanted people to go, hello, connect the dots. So what we see is a lot of teachers who are middle class struggling in schools. They'll think of students giving them an attitude by going like this, like, when in fact all they're showing you is exasperation and disgust at how the classroom's being run. And so helping teachers get on board is one way to be able to go after this. There's other ways too. Scientists have looked very hard at the brain to say, what do we know about the neurobiology of the brain? Is it different? I've graphed out the differences, and the differences are predictable. Biggest differences in what area of the brain starts with the letters LA. What is it? It's language areas of the brain. Surprisingly, the other areas that we see, working memory, cognitive control, and memory, 99 out of 100 teachers have no clue. those areas are functioning poorly. They see students making poor decisions, students that don't do this or that, and they say, what's wrong with them? Well, guess what? Chronic stress affects those three. Huge. So teachers don't know where to go after the problem, and that's a whole nother story. So if you would please decide between you and your partner at the table, which one will be green and which will be blue. Quick, pick a color. Blues, raise your hand. Beautiful. Blues, go first. You'll read what's in blue, and when you're done, greens, read what's in green. Ready, get set, go. Blues. So, quick question. How many of you have ever had days that were so stressful you actually felt stupider? Raise your hand. So this is kind of what they're talking about, isn't it? It's like things start to shut down under chronic stress, but there are students that are like that all the time. And teachers who don't know better will do their classroom like, these kids are out of control. First of all, they're our kids. They're the next generation. Secondly, the kids aren't out of control. What they lack is you giving them control. So the teachers who don't know better say, I'm going to exert more influence in my classroom, more control. So by doing that, what the kids do is the kids rebel even more, and it's like throwing gasoline on a fire. Bad choices made in a lot of classrooms. You get kids that just pull back, withdraw, and say, this school isn't for me. Now, what about that language bar we saw a moment ago? Question, which of these answers would you predict is correct? Make a guess, turn to your neighbor. Go ahead, tell your neighbor which one you're going to predict. How many would predict D for tenfold? Raise your hand, please. Those with your hands up are just a bit enthusiastic. It's a little bit lower than that. Right now, the numbers look like this, and many researchers around the country, this came from the original research of Hart and Riesling, but this has been confirmed by some recent numbers too. It's somewhere between 3 to 4 to 5 times the amount of vocabulary that's not there in those that grow up poor. So students from poverty, we said on the far, far left, non-poor, 74%, married parents. On the far right, you'll see over a third of single moms are poor. So that's not a good sign. We don't like to see that. In students of color from poverty, they rarely have assets that are social assets for role models, ones they can follow. Or in a school, if you said to most students of color, you said, quick list, who are your allies, who are advocates that you have at school, give me some names. Most of them will look at you like, nothing. And when you don't have assets like that, your job just got harder. So my big question is, have I got you discouraged? So do you feel like the skinny kid in the picture? If so, we'll see what we can do about that. The third one is, where do you focus on in schools? I have found it rare that schools do only one thing well and you get grand results. What I find is that they do most things pretty well and some things are exceptional, but you can't drop the ball here, 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 here and expect your school to work. You don't have that type of a safety net. There's a school here in San Diego that has 100% of the kids from poverty, and every year it sends between 95 and 100% of the kids off to four-year colleges. The mission of the school is outright. They say outright, our mission is to ensure that each student becomes the first in family history to go to college. Love that mission. So that means the mission drives everything that the school does. For example, when it comes to things like college applications, for middle-class families, it's a pain in the rear. For families from poverty, it can be overwhelming. For deciding what courses to take, overwhelming. What does this school do? It's a secondary school. What does it do? Every student beginning 9th grade gets their own scholarship committee. And the adults on that committee will do the problem solving with you. They say what colleges and universities. Before they even ask that, they say to the students, what do you think you might want to do in 5 or 10 years? Kids are like, I don't know, I was kind of thinking of such and such. Scholarship committee says, we'll meet back with you next week. And they come back and they say, this college is good and this one's good in that area. And of course, if the student says, whoa, I don't think you remember our family doesn't have any money. They said, not a problem, we'll help you navigate the process of getting a what? Scholarship. And when the scholarship committee comes back and says, now here's the coursework you need to complete to have a shot at it. The student looks at the coursework and says, whoa, trigonometry, me and math, we're like this. You know what the scholarship committee says? Not a problem, we'll find you a tutor. In other words, if you said to yourself, what is it that keeps students from going on to higher ed? This is an example of one of many schools around the country that says, we have figured out every single obstacle. And I mean that, every single one. And they've put in a system. It's not a prayer. Everyone has a system in place that assures that that student will get the best shot possible at it. The schools that struggle, when I tell them about what do strong schools do, they go, oh, that's an idea. Oh, that's an idea. That's an idea. And they write them all down and nothing changes. You have to be the school that says, we're going to be the ones that say that it's our mission to ensure that good things happen. So sometimes people say, well, where do we even start? Well, first thing you should start with helping your staff understand that it's easy to point fingers, but it's always better to look at the science. So one study was talking about the heritability of IQ. If your parents were middle or upper class, the heritability of their IQ in you, it's pretty high. That's 60+% depending on a host of factors. Why? There's fewer risk factors. But if your parents were lower income, the heritability of their income in you is actually pretty low. So when I read this study, I'm thinking, really? Like, oh? So I email the researchers, and I do that for most of the studies I present in my sessions because I like to make sure I get the science right. And I said, so why would that be? Is that because there's not a clean transfer of IQ? Is that because risk factors suppress IQ? Is that because of this or that? And when they answered me back, they said, yes, all of the above. You know, it's like you're not getting a good, clean read on it. So that means that no teacher at your school can go up to a student and go, well, I know just how she's going to do. I taught her daddy 20 years ago, and he wasn't the brightest one either. Well, a bigger problem might be the teacher still using the same lesson plan from 20 years ago. So understanding a little bit about the genetics of it helps you piece the puzzle together. So what's actually determining our destiny? When I grew up, we used to think it was either genes or environment. Today, we know it's much, much messier. That whole middle zone has just exploded. The field is known as epigenetics. Epigenetics, in a phrase, is the effect of the environment on the genes. We now know environments can do things like suppress a gene's normal function or allow it to express it. And that changes a lot because it means that what was fixed before may not be quite so fixed these days. So this allows new things to happen that people couldn't explain before. People used to think this was sort of freakish stuff. 65 low-income kids were adopted. All of them tested out with an IQ below 86. But 8 years later, after being adopted into middle-class and upper-class families, funny thing happened. Average IQ jumped 14 points. Now back up to what you and I might call typical. Can IQ change, yes or no? That was pretty weak. Can IQ change, yes or no? Yes, so IQ can change. Now, today we don't know how to raise IQ of 120 to 130, though that'll happen in our lifetime. But we do know how to take a student who's at an 80 IQ and bump that up. There's a lot of good things that can happen. So, for example, having your students read 9 straight days, 30 minutes a day. What do MRIs show us? They show us that the axons became far better myelinated, that there was way better connections in the brain in just 9 days. By the way, can reading change the brain, yes or no? Yes. Absolutely. So in this case, it was a study of a reading program called Fast Forward. The student in the middle who had dyslexia was undergoing a rhyming activity. And you can see using the left side of the brain, you see there's almost no activity there. That's bad if you're supposed to be reading. Over to the right, 12 weeks later, you see a nice sweet change in the student. Brains can change. We see this happening no matter where you go. Better mathematics practice, we see increased gray matter. We see when you teach vocabulary well, you literally add mass to the brain, increase gray matter. And the bonus of this is increased gray matter density is correlated with higher test scores. So we love to be able to see the science link up with classrooms. And of course, musicians versus non-musicians, we see nice changes in the brain too. The bottom line here is that brains have the capacity to make some pretty amazing changes. Everything you see on the screen are great skills for students at school. I call these apps for the brain. How many of you in this room remember the olden days when your phone only made a phone call? Raise your hand. So now people pile apps onto your smartphone. When I travel, I love apps like Google Maps, Waze, weather apps, airline apps, and all that. I don't actually feel smarter, but I do feel more capable, which is nice. So when your students have these in their brain, they're more capable, which over the long haul might change their sense of themselves. So loading these up in the classroom, meaning building these skills, is very smart. Many teachers do that through project-based learning. Many of them do it through skill building. Many of it do through doing real-world things. And so there's a lot of ways to do that. But when it comes to apps, most teachers think that it's tough to find good apps. 4 in 10 are a waste, according to a recent study by the Gates Foundation. So that's not good to hear that, teachers not liking it. So I bring this up because what educators really need are ones that'll help build language skills and build them fast. We need ones that'll help social emotional skills. We need ones that'll help them be more school ready, everything from attention builders, reasoning skills, problem solving, apps like that that are fun to play and that are more like human friendly. Human friendly means that they may be able to have an avatar, it's themselves right in there, that they're doing something that's meaningful, that they're playing games because it's a purpose, mission-driven activity. And the beautiful part is their brain grows. They need apps that are going to help them grow and do well. Examples of software. You might use an in-house asset with faculty that's trained to use software that's based on good science. I love sharing stories of good science because science has made some nice inroads. One of those would be the Fast Forward program that I like a lot. One of the things we know is that brains change faster than we used to think. For example, in this study, we saw structural brain changes. I don't mean changes in metabolic activity. Structure. In how many days? 5 days. Whenever a teacher says, I don't know what's wrong with this kid, she's not changing. Actually, she is. Students change pretty fast. You just want to steer it in the right direction. Please turn to your neighbor and say, DNA is not your destiny. Beautiful. So, one way to focus is focusing on cognitive skill building at your school. Most of the ones that do well do focus on that. They build students' capacity, but more importantly, they had to have the mindset to start with that says, this student's not stuck. Just because she tested that way, that doesn't tell me who she's going to become. That's the critical feature. So, second thing is, can you focus also on the emotional and social cognitive skill building? Those turn out to be quite important too. So when we dig into those, here's what we see. We see that educators have a lot more to do with how our students turn out than we thought. So you see a lot of schools do character building, emotional social skills building, and to do that, schools are putting systems in place. Good systems turn out to be really powerful. So examples might be providing more support from social emotional point of view. This may mean the use of teams, clubs, buddy systems, classroom activities that create glue instead of pulling students apart. And so some teachers think, oh, you should give kids choice, let them sit where they want. That's an idiotic idea. It's like if you gave kids complete choice over everything. They're going to grow up like wolves, social wolves, but they'll grow up like wolves. So I heard teachers talk at a school that I was doing some work for as a high school, a low-performing high school, and I said to the staff as I sat down at one of the tables, I said, "So how's your school doing?" And I already knew the scores were terrible. And they said, "Oh, not bad." And I said, "So tell me what you mean." And they said, "Not bad." "Well, the students rate us really high on the surveys." And I say, "So what is it that they like the most about your school?" And the kids said, "We get to do what we want." Now, if your educators were awesome at the school and they got kids to buy into doing everything, that was what the staff wanted, but the kids thought it was what they wanted. Now, that's pretty good, isn't it? So, what do we look for? Well, first of all, how kids feel every day is your million-dollar question. Now, there's more to it than that, but that's pretty important. Repeat after me, please. How we feel is what's real. It's the link to what we think. So I bring this up because many dismiss how kids feel, but how kids feel is actually a decision-making criteria for, do I want to go to school tomorrow? How do I feel about school? How am I treated? Am I treated as if I'm worthy? How does that work at school? And if it doesn't work, pretty soon they decide, I don't know if I want to keep going to school. So it's the amount of support that you provide. You provide connectivity for students. This means at your school, do you have mentor programs that are in place? Strong schools build systems. Struggling schools do random events. It's pretty straightforward. So what do I mean by random events? Somebody might come out, give the teachers a great PD. The day the speaker's gone, nothing changes. There's no support for it. There's nothing. Strong schools will say, you know what? I love that idea. Let's get a mentorship program in play. A principal came up to me and said, here's what our fifth graders do. Our fifth graders, they work with a partner and they go research colleges within driving distance. And they select one, do a poster presentation on it to second graders for a grade. So 2 fifth graders are presenting to 2 second graders for a grade. So I love that because if you're in second grade, fifth graders are like, ooh, pretty cool. And I said, I love that idea. How about having fourth graders research a job? That would be awesome within driving distance and present that to first graders. Principal loved the idea. So this notion of planting mindsets in kids, why can't that be student projects to do that? And there's thousands of other ways to do this, but the idea is making sure that students are getting what you and I might call some of those soft skills. So once we've got the soft skills happening, we'll see if I can find next, we look for the environments. So what happens in the environments? Are the environments have the type of support that students need? Or are they environments where, for example, a teacher calls on a student and after the student speaks, just goes to the next student? Or do they smile and say, thank you, I hadn't thought of that. The kid's like, yes. It's like, what kind of an environment is school? So the warm fuzzies are a big one. What rituals do you have? How much do you honor diversity? Do kids every day feel included or marginalized? These are huge issues for kids. And for most staff, they just think it's another day at work. But for kids, it's a decision of, am I buying into what the school's selling or not? Do I feel like I'm included? The other ways we look for this are with cognitive skills. If you ask me which skills I'd start with, the answer is every one of them. But vocabulary is often your biggest one. Reading skills, phonological processing, all of these have huge effect sizes on student achievement. You can't make a bad choice. Although if your school's struggling getting students reading by third grade, you have to make some pretty serious changes in that. What else would I go after? Parental support. Schools ask me, do we have to have parents on board? What if parents don't want to get involved in this? I say to them, listen, most high-performing schools have good parental support. That's just the bottom line. Are there exceptions to that? Yes. It's harder work because you're going after doing things that parents might have been able to do, and it just increased your workload. It is harder. But doing things like helping parents see the school as a partner instead of yuck, sending kids off to the evil empire every day. So building a partnership with your school is critical. Making sure students feel that every day they're always loving class. Is it inclusive? Other things, sometimes schools, they say, what do we do? How do we involve parents? I say, well, the usual is often pretty good, which means do you offer 2 hours of internet service at school? Do you offer food? Do you offer childcare services? But do you offer really cool courses and programs that can help them do a great job with their kids? Usually programs that say how to help your son or daughter stay motivated is a good idea, things like that. And of course, once the parents come, who are we really going after? The parents or the kids? It's the parents. Some parents don't know how to raise kids because the models they had in their home weren't good models. I didn't have good models in my home. It's like when I was 2 years old, the first memory that's the age at which is the first memory in my life. I just remember standing at home in our living room. I grew up here in San Diego. I just remember tears running down my cheeks. So that was the day my parents split up. So it was my mom that left, not my dad. So in that moment, I already felt this sense of abandonment. You feel like you get run over by a truck if you're 2 and your parents are walking out on you, or one parent is, and it just went downhill from there. So my father, who became a marriage counselor, which is entertaining because he married 4 times, just telling you the truth. He married 4 times. His second wife was his worst choice, but he decided he was going to keep this marriage together because he mucked up his last marriage. So his second wife, who became my first of 3 stepmothers, was the one who happened to be violent and alcoholic and abusive. You check all the bad boxes, the ones that today you'd get locked up for and go to prison and stuff. That's what she was like. We saw blood and broken glass all the time as a kid. My oldest sister, Chris, moved out after a couple of weeks and lived with my neighbors. I knew where she grew up. I just didn't grow up with her. My other sister, Tony, moved out of the house and lived in the garage for 9 years. No bathroom out in the garage, so she'd sneak into the house when no one's looking, sort of stuff. So every time things got extra bad at home, my dad would come to his senses and he'd take my sister, my garage sister, terrible name, but my garage sister. But I'm just trying to help you kind of identify who's what. Tony doesn't help you very much. So he'd take my garage sister, myself, and then we'd move out and go live with my grandmother for a few months. And then we'd go to a new school, new friends, blah, blah, blah. And then evil stepmother would promise to be good. We'd move back, and then things get bad again. We'd move out again, go live with my aunt and uncle. Evil stepmom promised to be good. We move back again. Things get bad again. We move out again. So growing up here in San Diego, I went to 9 schools and had 153 teachers growing up. I never kept any friends because I was never around long enough to keep a friendship. And they didn't have Facebook and all that back when I was a kid. So when you moved, that was it. So I grew up with this sense of parents aren't very trusty, all those things, messages in my head. I bring this up because unless students get support that can help them develop new mindsets about stability, about you're valued, that you're authentic, that you're a good person, unless they can get those from the messages around them, it's really tough for them to be able to succeed in school. So the parental support's got to be strong. The staff support has got to be strong. Most schools that struggle, they throw the same old at staff over and over and over. I know because I go to those schools and all it is triage. What we see at schools, we see dysfunctional professional learning communities. We see dysfunctional leadership. And the leaders who struggle, they just want to buy their way out of the problem. And you can't do that. Poverty is a people issue, and it takes people to be able to help make things work. This right here just helps you appreciate all the other slides that look awesome. So we just put this in. And I have no idea what's on that. But for some strange reason, my slides sort of froze up on the screen, and our tech people are working at top speed to be able to help make that. I think he's going to switch over to a new slide. It's quite impressive, by the way, that he runs backup copies. So I'm quite impressed. So he's clicking on this and is going to make this work. Look at that. That's pretty close. You could start that one up. He's working at top speed. Ta-da! Big hand for the tech guy. All right. So I said, what we look for is we look for the hard skills and the soft skills. Both of those are important. And where do we go with this? First thing that has to happen is leaders have to be different when you work at Title I schools. What do we mean by different? Oh, are you good? Okay. One thing that's got to be different is leaders have to learn how to build narratives. Narratives are often underappreciated, but the narrative in your brain is so amazing that what you thought would happen today, the bulk of it's already coming true. That's amazing when you think of it. Your brain is primarily a prediction processor because that's your survival. But when you woke up this morning, if you're from out of town, your brain says, where am I? Oh yeah, okay. What am I going to do today? What presentation am I going to go to? Who am I going to connect with? That's what your brain does. And by and large, most of your predictions come true. I didn't say it's 100%, but it's pretty close on your life. And I bring this up because leaders have to be able to have a different narrative than staff. Visualize this school. Why would you want to do that? Because you'll be really blown away to do this. So 100% of the students free and reduced lunch, 96% begin below grade level. Neighborhood's so dangerous, parents want extra security for kids coming and going. So far, seems like kind of a tough school. So in Chicago, many of the schools have been able to get permission to be able to sort of break some rules because Chicago public schools, many of them are struggling. So they want to say, okay, we'll break some rules and see what we can do. There's increasing number of charter schools in Chicago. At this particular school, they've got all male public high schools now. And you might be thinking, whoa, a lot of testosterone in the same zip code? I don't know if that's a good idea. Question for you, what % of those kids do you think go off to college? Make a prediction, tell your neighbor. And how many would predict either A, B, or C? Raise your hand if you did. Thank you, O ye of little faith. Those of you that raised your hand, do you think I'd waste my time sharing with you a bad school? Really? A bad school? Is there things you can learn from it? Actually, they've sent 100% off to college, and they've done it 7 years in a row. And if you're thinking that they send these kids to some cheesy little sweetheart college in the Midwest where everybody gets into the college, they've sent them to 180 colleges and universities around the country. The kids have qualified for $11 million in scholarships. So what do? They are really, really strong on first character building, social emotional skills, and then they go after the academics. Why? Because that's their platform. So I bring this up because it's important to understand that the narrative, if you have a staff that says, where was that school? Yeah, but how long did it take? Yeah, but the ethnicity is different, but is it public? Nah. All of those are yeah buts. They're all yeah buts. And you have to be able to say to yourself, so what's the narrative I'm putting out? Maybe the enemy is us. Maybe we aren't adapting very fast. Because if that's happening, that's not a good sign. So you'll find a lot of schools that can check all the boxes and said, yep, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this. But when you ask the question, things like the second one, so how functional is your PLCs? Like, have they aggregated the data well enough to take action on the students that were struggling, and is there improvement in those students? Well, we haven't gotten that far, but you check the box. So some are so happy to say they're compliant when actually their school name should just be Grindstone Elementary. Oh, wait, it is. So question is, how does leadership drive that change? And the answer is, partly what leaders do is they have a vision to be able to see things that others don't. The vision that they have is that they know what kind of narratives to put out. Instead of saying this year can be our best ever, like whatever that means, 1% better. But do they know that strong teaching matters? Evidence shows that it takes about 5 years of above average teaching to erase the academic effects of poverty. When teachers look at me like, yeah, right, actually I show them the data from an El Paso school district, large school district, public schools. What they did is they looked backwards at data, and here's what they found. They found a cluster of students with math scores a full standard deviation above the district mean, and another cluster of kids a full standard deviation below. So easy to predict which group of kids would perform well over time, or is it? What would happen if you had above average teachers? So I let teachers write down their predictions. And then I say, well, here's what happened in the real world. Why? If you get a big enough sample size, you'll find a lot of anomalies, won't you? This is what happened in the real world. The so-called low kids, and by the way, I don't let teachers ever call kids low kids. I say, unless you want me to come out to your school and point out which teachers they've had the last 5 years. So I say to them, I say, this is what happens when you get an above average teacher. Year after year after year after year. This group of kids right here, their parents won the Powerball lottery of education. That is as good as it gets in education. Year after year after year of an above average teacher. That's the jackpot. So I bring this up because we've got 25 million students who are growing up in the United States from poverty, and I'll show you right here. Strong school districts, what they constantly do is hold up a mirror. They're always checking themselves. There's none of this. It's always, let's look at ourselves. So this means for leadership, give people a why. Give them a reason to believe in you. When you share your mission, don't say, here's where we're going, unless you tell them, here's why that's going to happen. Because when you do that, good things happen. Principal or superintendent says we'll become the most improved district in our state. Why? Give me a reason to believe. When you do that, you get more people on your side, because most people sit there like this. And when you really want to make a difference, you say, and the first thing we're going to do is this, then this, then this. Give them the micro goals. When you do that, you get people on board. People will do anything to help you reach dreams like this. That's why I say back up your goals at a district level. Give people a good reason to believe. So I've done this with leaders all around the country, and we start getting good response. My question is your narrative that you're putting out as a leader, is it gutsy? Does it challenge people to be amazing? So I want to close in on the last one. We'll finish up. I'd like you to foster a 1% growth plan. Invite your staff to grow 1% a week. Invite yourself to do that. So why 1% a week? Because over the course of a year, pretty much it's epic for making changes. So what I go after in a school district, I'm going after creating awareness about poverty. We get alignment with everybody in the district. We make sure we've got resources allocated, and we go after professional development in the areas that have the highest effect sizes, that take the lowest skill levels for the shortest amount of time of training of teachers. So 25 million students, maybe less than a generation to turn this around. Martin Luther King made an impassioned speech in Riverside Church in New York City, 1964, and he used the phrase, the fierce urgency of now. I love that. The fierce urgency of now is this. Can you seize on this opportunity where you work to say, this is our challenge in our generation. We're not kicking the can down the road. That's the challenge that we're after. And we have to go after that cognitively as well as emotionally. My gutsy goal, 100% graduate, job ready, college ready by 2020. What's the 1%? The 1% is simple. It's learning to become reflective with daily reflective questions. These questions will be in your handout that you download, and I'll give you that right as we finish up. And these questions have been used as professional development and leadership coaching for some of the best executives in the country. So the questions are up on the screen, but I'll give you those. I want to finish up here, since my time's about up, with the big question. What is your favorite sticky idea from our short session today? I said I was going to ask you for your ABC idea. What's the idea that you heard that you liked or that got reinforced that to you was worth being here for? Go ahead, tell your neighbor, please. Ready, get set, go. Our time is up. Pause for a moment. One more time, I put the URL up on the bottom of the screen for those that want to get the PowerPoint to it, plus the 1% solution. We just had a short time here this afternoon. How many found it valuable? Raise your hand if you did. Beautiful. Thank you very much. We will see you around.